Welcome into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, 7 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, May 23rd. Welcome in. We are in the midst of drafting season. If you haven't started drafting yet, what's wrong with you? Because you are cashing in on a lot of great deals right now. I am Eric Balkman. You know me from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on Friday nights. You know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Slowdown, and of course the Fantasy Football Players Championship as well. You can follow me on the X at Eric Balkman, EricBalkman. Let me welcome in my guest co-host with the most tonight. You've seen his work on RotoBaller.com. You listen to his voice and see him on the Woo Fantasy podcast as well. Follow him on the X at Roto Superstar, the FSWA nominated and award winner, Brandon Murchison. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me tonight. When your Cowboys and your Cardinals are like, here's the thing, man. Cardinals are facing dire times right now in Major League Baseball. I don't know if we want to touch on baseball or how much we want to do it tonight, but the Cowboys, I do a local show in northeastern Wisconsin here, and one of the topics we talked about today was Prescott watch and what's going on there. Like, it's crazy, man.
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. Glad we kind of connected and got this whole thing set up, and I'm looking forward to this. Should be a great night of fantasy football discussion, but yeah, we're on Prescott watch. But on top of that, we're on CD Lamb watch. On top of that, we're on Micah Parsons watch. We're on every single player watch for the Dallas Cowboys as we come into the 2024 season. And obviously, you mentioned Prescott. The talk of the NFL over the last couple of days is he's playing for passion. He's not playing for money. Let's see how that shakes out when the negotiations truly do start, and he's going to want that $60 million annual salary that I'm assuming is what he's going to expect coming to him. We'll see how that plays out and whether or not the passion and money comes into play.
You know, you talk about passion and money, and this came to mind like with again, back to baseball. Josh Hader was a relief pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers, as you know, for many years. And then he ended up losing an arbitration. I love that we're kicking off a fantasy football show with so much baseball stuff, but I promise you there's a method to my madness here. And he ends up losing an arbitration to the Brewers. And then the following year, he goes to the Brewers saying, I want to make sure I'm doing this, but not this, to make sure his numbers are going to be maximized as far as his arbitration the following year, and to make sure. And there's a lot of Brewers fans that are upset with him, like, oh, this guy was just all out for himself, and he didn't care about the team, and he didn't care about winning. And I was like, as a fan, I can understand that. But at the same time, I was in that same place. I would be looking out for me too. Like, the team is going to be there long after I'm gone. The team was there long before I got there. But what's pertinent for me is making sure that I maximize how much I can get in this small amount of time I have to be a professional athlete. And my co-host today, we were talking about it, and he said, well, most people are probably ticked at Prescott. And I'm like, I think most people are ticked at Jerry Jones. Like, they understand the situation that Prescott's in. Him and his representation are trying to get as much as they can while they can, because in 4 years, there's no way Prescott's going to be worth what he is right now in this moment in time. And so I don't really fault the player at this point, as much as that stinks, like, I'm cheering for this guy and all he cares about is money. Well, this amount of money, like, I would be caring about money too. Like, I would be putting myself in front. Yeah, am I going to gut it out when maybe I shouldn't? Yeah, I'm probably still going to do that. But at the same time, I want to look out for my long-term health. And that's why I think this Prescott thing gets figured out, because I don't know if his agent is comfortable sending Prescott onto a field knowing that, this could be it if he suffers a long-term injury. And he's had some pretty significant injuries in his past too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that he has. But here's the dichotomy here is you're looking at with the Prescott and Jerry Jones Cowboys situation is you're looking at it from a standpoint of, obviously, the Cowboys have been a little bit strapped from a salary cap standpoint. We saw that with free agency here in the last couple of months. But with Dak Prescott, he's already been extended once. Now you're coming into a second extension that he's looking for to try to increase that value. But do you want to pay him primarily on his regular season accolades versus what he has done against stiffer competition when the lights are the brightest, when it comes to playoff time? that's what Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones' son is really kind of looking at right now, is they're really putting the foot to the pedal and going, we need to see something when it comes to Dak Prescott's performance in these high leverage situations, something that he's faltered in over the last few years, and we've seen it mightily. And now Prescott, like you said, he wants to get his money. He wants to get it while he can in that short period of time. Obviously, I don't fault him there, but I can see it from the business aspect from Jerry Jones and the family, is that now in the tweet that's been making the rounds as far as, the last few days on X as well too, every other single team in the Dallas metro area is either in the conference finals or have been in a championship game. The Texas Rangers, the Dallas Mavericks, and now you have the Dallas Stars in the NHL Western Conference Finals. Cowboys, 1995. And that is something to really, it is eating away at Jerry Jones and the family right now, is they want to be on the forefront and be competing for titles, but they're not actually putting it out there and really going for gusto to get that done.
I promise you, this is not the only time we will touch on the Dallas Cowboys tonight. We have so much to get to tonight. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit more about, we talked about Prescott. Let's talk more about Lamar Jackson, Anthony Richardson coming up in just a few minutes. To finish off the bottom of the hour, we're going to find out where Brandon Murchison stands on players like Jalen Wright, players like Jermaine Burton, Malachi Corley, so on and so forth. And then in the second hour, let's get into, is it Kyron or Kieran? How do you do this? This is weird. Kyron Williams or Kieran Williams, Brandon? I don't know.
It's Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams is the guy.
All right.
Yes.
Kyron Williams. We will go with Kyron Williams. We'll talk about him tonight. We'll also get into some Jonathan Brooks talk. I know there's a lot of rookie stuff tonight, but we'll get into a lot of stuff. Antonio Gibson as well. And then we'll wrap things up with a Would You Rather segment. We'll go rapid fire with Puka Nacua, Trey McBride, Ramondre Stevenson, Brock Purdy, Ben Sinnott, and much more. That is all coming up on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show tonight. Well, as a reminder, the 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship is live. If you want to win $1 million, it's just a $350 entry fee. Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com, a $6 million prize pool. That's where to play that. All the ADP data that we are going to be giving tonight be coming directly from Fantasy Mojo, fantasymojo.com. Darren Armani, the godfather of the Pros versus Joes Challenge. He is the one who puts together all this, and we're going to be talking about everything from a best ball standpoint tonight, FFPC best ball. So all the ADPs that you hear, that's what's going on. If you want to participate in this, go to myffpc.com. A $300,000 grand prize is at stake this year, up from $200,000 last year. It's going to be a lot of fun. Empire Leagues, Dynasty Startups, all available at myffpc.com. And the Superflex Best Ball Tournament, by the way, is also live with the FFPC. Go to myffpc.com. Last year, that was a $50,000 grand prize. Now, for just a $35 entry fee, you can win a $100,000 grand prize. That's it. Again, myffpc.com. Shout out to our producer, Matt Deutsch, tonight. And let's get into Lamar Jackson. So this is interesting. He was the NFL MVP last year, Brandon. He dropped weight this year to be more agile. Now, on my bingo card of things that I wanted to see in the NFL this year, seeing a more agile Lamar Jackson was not on there. But apparently we're going to see it this year. He weighed 205 pounds this year. Last year, he weighed, 2022, he weighed 230. Last year, he weighed 215. Now he is down to a svelte 205. He is going off the board at the 411 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament at the end of the fourth round. I look at the Ravens this year, and they've added Derrick Henry, which you don't have to touch on it quite yet because we'll get into that in a little bit. But specifically with this weight loss thing, are you bumping him up, keeping him the same, bumping him down strictly because of the weight loss? Does that affect how you're drafting Lamar Jackson at all this season?
No, I don't think so. I think he's going to hold that value for me, where I've got him kind of slotted in currently. Weight loss be, judged into it, whatever have you. But the key thing that I'm looking at with Lamar Jackson heading into this season is the second year under Todd Monken in this offense. They've got a year that they've had to grow in this offense. Last year, you saw it. There was a little bit of headaches at times. They tried to run the ball a little bit too much at certain periods of time, though. But coming into this second year, I think you're going to have a lot more acceptance of the offense, a lot more knowledge and bits and pieces of what they're going to want to do on the field. You've got pieces in place. We've seen that they've got the offensive weapons in place. Mark Andrews returning from the injury. We saw Isaiah Likely, kind of beef up his production in Andrews' absence last year. Zay Flowers performed admirably as a rookie last year. Rashad Bateman, we're already hearing he's in the best shape of his life talk in OTAs. And so the pieces are there for them to kind of take another step forward. I think what Lamar Jackson losing the weight is going to help from an agility standpoint with that spread formation type of an offense that's going to allow him to utilize the open space on those breakdown plays and get out of containment and get down the field. And you'll see it a little bit more with those, over 15-yard runs, something that he did kind of lack a little bit last year. So I think that's, for me, it's going to be a bump for his rushing potential this year, which is going to keep him up there in that top 5 when it comes to the fantasy quarterbacks in 2024.
You're of the opinion, excuse me, this does not affect Mark Andrews. This does not affect Zay Flowers. This does not affect the pass catchers, Bateman, like you mentioned at all, right?
No, I know. I think they're still going to run at a premium pace with the offense, but a lot of people, what's something that you're not kind of keeping in mind when you discuss this Ravens team is some of the pieces that they're going to be missing on the defensive side of the ball, which is going to lead to the Ravens playing more up-tempo, trying to keep pace with points. Because let's be honest, they're going to be facing a little bit tougher of a schedule this year as well. So I think it's going to bleed into where you're going to see the Ravens have to try to keep up from an offensive standpoint, getting down the field. The tempo is going to be up there. There's going to be a lot more potential for production for Lamar Jackson and the offense as a whole.
The interesting thing I'll bring up here is right now back-to-back at the 410, 411 right now in the FFPC best ball tournament. Quarterback 3, quarterback 4, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. Brandon, who are you hitching your wagon to, let's just assume you can only draft in one team in this tournament. Would you rather have Jackson or Mahomes at your quarterback at the 410?
Ooh, well, for me, I'm still leaning Patrick Mahomes. I know we had the last year, the down season with Patrick Mahomes. I believe he finished QB 14 on an average points per game basis. So a lot of people were turned off by that. And that can help you when it comes to a recency bias standpoint, because you're going to be able to get Patrick Mahomes at a better price when it comes to potential draft value when we get into the summer months and August. For me right now, as it stands, I'm definitely going to be more invested into Patrick Mahomes. The improvements to the offense, bringing in Hollywood Brown, bringing in Xavier Worthy that they drafted as well. I think that offense is going to get back to where they can exploit bigger plays down the field, and that's going to open things up for Patrick Mahomes to get back to what we saw from him 2 and 3 years ago. And for me, that upside is going to lend me to be in more on Patrick Mahomes than Lamar Jackson.
It's just weird. You think about it. Like, I feel like every single year we talk about Patrick Mahomes being a value, and then every single year he falls a little bit more. And he's a value. Yes, he is. Every single year he's a value. Like, he puts up numbers every single year, and every single year the people who draft him are really thrilled that they did draft him at that point. So that is where you weigh in on Jackson and Mahomes. I happen to agree with you, by the way. Yep. The other thing to keep in mind with this weight loss thing, and I know you said it's kind of a nothing burger, and I tend to agree with that, but I feel like sometimes, weight loss or weight gain, I feel like more than 50% of the time it either has no effect or a bad effect. Like, I can't remember the last time somebody gained weight or lost weight, and we're at the end of the season, we're like, yeah, really was good that he had that weight change, it's either it was nothing or we're ticked off about the guy's results. It's just weird how that works out sometimes. And that's not, that's just here and there. It's more like an observation than anything statistically I've researched at all. A quarterback that I think is definitely arguably the most compelling quarterback to talk about in fantasy football leagues this year is Anthony Richardson. He's the second-year guy. He was on pace to break off a ton of not only rookie records, but quarterback records had he kept up the pace that he was on before he got hurt last year. Now, he had the shoulder injury that knocked him out for the season. He's playing 11 on 11 in OTAs right now. And he just turned 22 years old yesterday. So happy birthday to Anthony Richardson. He is going at the 5'10" in the FFPC best ball tournament right now, sort of by himself. We
Yep.
mentioned Jackson and Mahomes. They're going a full round ahead of them. Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, you're looking at, I don't know, almost a round and a half later. CJ Stroud is kind of in the same neighborhood. He's going about, I don't know, 4 or 5 picks before him. And so I guess Stroud and Richardson, which is really compelling when you talk about that conversation, which quarterback you'd rather have. But just talk about Anthony Richardson in general this year, because I don't want to say he's a polarizing guy, but there's a lot of people that were really excited that they drafted him last year. And had it not been for that injury, they might have rode him to $1 million glory in the FFPC. However, the way he plays the game, Brandon, I don't know if we can just erase the whole injury aspect, because he might be putting himself in harm's way again.
Yeah, and that's the thing is we are sitting, May 23rd, and Anthony Richardson is already developing into the darling of the fantasy community from a sleeper standpoint and a hype standpoint as we head into the training camps in the summer months for fantasy football. Everyone is amazed and grabbing a hold of that small sample size you mentioned from last year. He was top quarterback in the league from a fantasy points per game standpoint, fantasy points per drop back as well, led in both of those categories in that short time span. And, myself, I was snake bit by Anthony Richardson myself last year. I did draft him and kind of had to go fall back on to get your second options ready to play. But you mentioned it. That's the thing, is his playing style breeds to taking those hits, leading himself into those situations where that might play into injury status being a thing for Anthony Richardson. Mm-hmm. And we just talked about Lamar Jackson and the weight loss. That's something else to keep in mind from that standpoint as well. Will the weight loss and potential hits accumulating through the season lead into, that injury bug creeping up ever so slightly more? And I think that's with Anthony Richardson coming into this year. I think he learned what he can and cannot do in that short time span last year. They're building this offense around his skill set and his strengths, and I think that's going to be something they're going to utilize going forward. And I think we're in for a big year if Anthony Richardson can stay on the field. Let's say give him 15 games. Let's factor in a couple games missed, but even in 15 games, I think he's going to be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy in 2024.
I know you're a volume drafter. What percentage are you shooting for shares of Richardson this year?
I want to be around in the exposure rate for a guy like that I'm kind of high on. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to reach a little bit more. So I'm probably going to be shooting in that 27 to 33% exposure area,
which is still kind of aggressive, right?
Right.
But I mean, I guess you're high on them, so why wouldn't you want to be aggressive?
Yeah.
Right?
And so you want to kind of build your stacks and things like that of that nature. You want to go get the guy a little bit sooner, depending on where you are and you're placed in some of these drafts. And that's kind of where I'm looking at right now. And it also, of course, too, it depends on the type of format you're in. Always remember that scoring format is king. Knowing that and having the knowledge before you go into the draft, which players are going to be more beneficial to you in those leagues that you're drafting in. And most of the ones that I'm in, you get a lot more for those rushing potentials. And Anthony Richardson's going to be a guy that's going to be bringing bacon home to people this year in 2024 for that rushing upside.
Family Ties own Alex P. Keaton joining us on the YouTube chat tonight, and we're talking about weight loss and weight gain. And he said only Le'Veon Bell's weight loss from his rookie year to his second season was a legit difference maker. And while I cannot disagree with that, I'd have to really do some studies to find weight gain and weight loss to find out if there's anybody else. But that's right. I mean, he is right with the Le'Veon Bell. I do remember that significantly. Le'Veon Bell was an interesting guy. Not that I want to go down fantasy football memory lane here, but I do remember that guy being a player that I was not all excited. And you follow college football pretty closely, don't you, Brandon? Were you following it that closely when Le'Veon Bell was at Michigan State back then? I mean, I never thought of him as like a big time difference maker when he got to the pros, but he was.
I mean, he was an agile playmaker at Michigan State, broke off a lot of big runs. He was a tackle breaking machine at Michigan State, something that translated over into the NFL. We saw kind of later on in his career, but his biggest thing was that patience. And that's what they always talked about with Le'Veon Bell. He showed that patience behind the line of scrimmage before deciding where he was going to take and make his move. And that's something that really kind of bled into his, translated into the NFL perfectly behind that Steelers offensive line, that offensive scheme that they had in place. And that for him, Le'Veon Bell, that was That was a big move in the NFL, losing the weight, building that agility, building that speed. And that's what led him into being one of the more productive backs in fantasy for a hot minute.
Chad Parsons, who I know you just did a show with too,
Yep.
Under the Helmet Dynasty, a former co-host of this show. Obviously, check out his work there, Football Guys. He said he slimmed down a ton, 230 pounds, and he did a great 3-cone drill at the combine too. Bell was one of the guys that, like, the list of guys I've missed on in Dynasty. Like, you could write a novel longer than the Bible at this point for me. But he was another guy that I wish I had more shares of. And I guess that's just how it is when you play fantasy football. When a guy hits, you wish you had 100% shares. When a guy misses, you wish you had 0% of the shares. It just doesn't work out that way. But that's why we love it. That's why we hate it. That's why we play it. Christian Kirk, 604 is where he is going in the FFPC best ball tournament. He missed the last 5 games of this past season with a groin injury. He says he's feeling good. He's feeling healthy during OTAs. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars passing game is a little bit different this year. No more Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley has moved on to, I don't know, possibly greener pastures in Tennessee. I think it's more like off-green pastures in Tennessee. We'll see what happens there. But they did add Brian Thomas in the draft. They did add Gabe Davis in free agency. I feel like I've always been a fan of Christian Kirk, even dating back to his Cardinals days. I've been drafting him and getting him on the cheap in dynasty leagues. And I feel like this is another year as we enter, not even enter, but we're in the midst of the 2024 drafting season. Christian Kirk in the early 6th round, I feel like this is another guy that you should be targeting. You look at Trevor Lawrence. We just found out, we'll get into Travis Etienne later on in the show, but it sounds like they want to amp down his workload too. You look at Christian Kirk. This is a guy that seemingly nobody is excited about every year, and yet every year he puts up pretty good numbers. I think this is another guy I target in a lot of leagues this year. How do you feel about him?
I'm all for Christian Kirk, especially in 2024, coming into this season. You mentioned Brian Thomas coming in, Gabe Davis getting signed. I think those two are kind of offsetting each other as far as play style and what they're going to use for those two guys on the field. Christian Kirk's going to maintain his operations out of the slot, which is go back to the recency bias, like I just said a few minutes ago. Recency bias last year, Christian Kirk missed the last few games of the season, like we mentioned. But going back to that fully healthy season in 2022, when he first came to the Jacksonville Jaguars, he finishes the season as a QB, like a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 11, I believe is what his finish was in 2022. And I feel like I'm not as high on him as some people consensus wise, but rankings, I've got him as a tail end wide receiver 2 right now. Wide receiver 23 is where I've got him ranked. And I'm going to attack him if I can get him at the current ADP that he's falling at. Just the upside alone, I think, in the rapport that he has with Trevor Lawrence, it was something that they missed mightily on the field last year when he was not playing. And you kind of saw Trevor Lawrence struggle when Christian Kirk was not on the field. And so for me, I think that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're valuing Christian Kirk this year, is go back and look what he did in 2022, fully healthy, full complement of snaps and on the field all the time, as opposed to last year. Targets, I think he's going to be the main target earner in the offense. Obviously, a guy that's going to be looking at a chance to get upwards of that 90-95 reception mark this year, I think is where we're looking. And if he can get in the range of kind of 8 to 10 touchdowns, you're looking at a guy that's going to be pushing, low end wide receiver 1 numbers again.
Low end wide receiver number. I mean, like, think about that too. Like, if that's the case with Christian Kirk this year, even if it's not the case, let's say, that's crazy, Brandon. He's never going to get that. Even if you believe that, he's going as wide receiver 30 in the early 6th round. I mean, like, so he doesn't get wide receiver 1 numbers. He's being drafted as a mid wide receiver 3 at this point. People are always talking about how do we cash in and try to win this $300,000 in the best ball tournament if we want to draft in May. This is a perfect way to do it, to get a guy like this who should move. Ostensibly, he should move up, Brandon. Like, as we get through the summer, he should be moving up. If he doesn't, man, keep drafting him at this point, because I love that. Yeah. I love that where he's going right now. He's in the Hollywood Brown, Keenan Allen, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Tank Dell glut that is going basically throughout the 6th round right now. But Kirk, for whatever reason, stands out a little bit. I think you can tell yourself a story about a lot of those guys. Allen and Brown, obviously, in new places. McLaurin with a new quarterback. Amari Cooper, I mean, he's Amari Cooper. And then Tank Dell recovering from that. essentially his in-season and off-season injury on a offense with arguably the best quarterback or the best up-and-coming quarterback in the NFL. But Christian Kirk, man, I really think there's something there. So I'm with you on that for sure. Speaking of Hollywood Brown, Kansas City Chiefs head coach Andy Reid this week, yesterday actually, talked about how much he just was raving, didn't talk about it. He was raving about how good Marquise Brown was at OTAs. Brown is going in that area, that mid-6th round that I just talked about. And I've heard a lot of pundits in the fantasy injury, colleagues of ours, that have been talking up Marquise Brown. I think Dave Kluge from Football Guys was just talking about how much he loves him this year as well. And he's not alone. There's a lot of people that are really talking about what a good season he should have in Kansas City. You know, when he was with Baltimore, the Ravens weren't throwing a ton. When he was with Arizona, they had their own issues. You know, Kyler Murray missed a good chunk of time there as well. So you could tell yourself a story, but I think that story might be closer to nonfiction than fiction. And I'm a little surprised, quite frankly, and maybe this is just because people have been burned on him in the past, that he has not risen up higher than the mid-6th round right now. He's another guy. You miss out on Kirk. I'm fine with Hollywood Brown there. How do you feel about Marquise Brown this season, Brandon?
Depends on the format you're going to be drafting in. Like for me, he's a perfect target in a best ball format, you know, where you don't have to worry about those spike weeks. He's going to pop off occasionally. You know that with Marquise Brown. That's kind of been his MO in the past. A lot of people are looking at him. He's coming off of those 2 years where he's really underperformed and disappointed a lot of fantasy managers in his time in Arizona. And a lot of that had to do with putting him in a kind of an unfair situation where he was counted on as a team's wide receiver 1. And I don't think that's what he projects to be. He's more comfortable in a secondary or third tier wide receiver in a rotation and a pass, the target funnel for an offense. And that's what he's going to be in Kansas City now, whether or not how things are going to shake out with Rashee Rice in that situation right now, whether he gets suspended or not. Travis Kelce is the top dog in that offense. He's going to be the guy that's looked at first and foremost. And then after that, Rashee Rice, we saw last year, kind of made that step forward in the offense in his rookie season. So if he's on the field and in play, then that's your second target in the offense. But then after that, now you fit in a Marquise Brown. Now you fit in an Xavier Worthy, the rookie out of Texas, the speed burner. So I think that's going to be a situation now with Marquise Brown. He fits into a more comfortable situation, and that's helping Patrick Mahomes too. He's not really had this level of quarterback play either, and that he can rely on from an accuracy standpoint. Ball's going to be where it should be, and not a lot of off target plays, out of sync plays like he's been used to with Kyler Murray and Lamar Jackson in the past, guys that are going to roll out of the pocket and extend plays. Patrick Mahomes is going to be bang, 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 5-step drop, get the ball out here, boom. And that's going to be something I think it's going to help a Marquise Brown. He's going to be facing those second and third string defensive backs. He can work those guys, get down the field, find open space. He's definitely a guy that you can get, later on in drafts. I mean, he's going to a double-digit rounds right now, close to it. So definitely a buying opportunity because of the offense that he's in now.
The other aspect of this with the Chiefs is Xavier Worthy. Now he is going in the late 7th round. This is a guy who's the 21st overall pick of the 2024 draft. He was not participating in OTAs yesterday. I don't know if the Chiefs had him today or not, but I know yesterday he didn't practice because he tweaked his hamstring earlier this week. He's only 165 pounds. I don't necessarily have any data on whether if you are more slight, you are more prone to soft tissue injuries. I would think that if you win based on how fast you are, I would think that you would be very concerned with a soft tissue injury, hamstrings, quads, whatever. Knowing that you just said that it is going to be a quick offense. In other words, Mahomes is going to get rid of the ball quickly to Brown, to Kelce, what have you. Worthy is the opposite of that, right? Worthy wins downfield. He is a burner. And when we talk about players like this that aren't necessarily a focal point of being targeted a lot of times every single week, rather you're going to be targeted a few times every single week. And those spike weeks happen, right? In best ball. That's what we're looking for. So with Xavier Worthy, it's so weird because these guys are on the same team. Marquise Brown and him are on the same team. 4 picks of ADP separate them. Marquise Brown 607, Xavier Worthy at the 611 right now. And they're on the same team, but they're totally different types of players. Who would you rather draft? I mean, I kind of depends upon who your first 5 picks were, right? But if you're drafting in the 6th round, Brandon, and you're facing Marquise Brown and you're facing Xavier Worthy, that's a tough call.
Well, it really depends. I mean, because you're talking about a situation where, if especially in a big kind of a tournament type setting, you really want to win a big prize, you're shooting for upside. That's always the goal. And what's the upside play between these two players? I think the biggest shoot for the moon play is Xavier Worthy. And then that speed that he can bring. And obviously, you mentioned his MO. A lot of people talk about his downfield ability and getting downfield, stretching the field. But in his time at Texas, he was a guy that was a target earner all over the place. Whether it be wide receiver screens, whether it be over the middle, he's a guy that can run every single route on the route tree. And I think that's something that they've been lacking in this offense as well, where Marquise Brown's going to really kind of be represented more in that true X receiver type role. Probably more of a limited route tree, which is going to lead itself into less targets in the offense, where they're going to want to work a player like Xavier Worthy into the offense creatively and get the ball into his hands. Now, you mentioned a slight frame, mentioned he's already banged up with a hamstring injury, and it brings back horror stories for people thinking, John Ross back in the day, who just signed with the Philadelphia Eagles this week as well. And he's kind of, that's the thing you're looking at with those two players. Is Xavier Worthy going to be on that John Ross type of NFL track where he's always fighting those soft tissue injuries because of the speed? A lot of those guys don't know how to dial it down. And when they don't, that's going to lead to those hamstring injuries and things of that nature. And you're going to have times where he's going to be missing and off the field. But from an upside play, and if I'm going for a guy that's really going to just hit a home run, kind of like last year with a Tank Dell, a lot of people were turned off by him and didn't know really how to look at him. It's kind of how the same way I'm viewing Xavier Worthy this year, only that the ADP is very much higher than what is for Tank Dell last year.
It's interesting because I think you can build your team a few different ways in the FFPC best ball tournament. Obviously, tight end premium, you want to go tight end heavy or whatever. But you could go with, I don't want to say spike week guys in the first 5 rounds, but you could go with these high upside guys that are going to put up these 30-point weeks, but they might have like a 4 or 5 point week. And maybe Marquise Brown actually makes more sense for your team in the 6th round at that point, because he is more of a, for lack of a better term, a steady Eddie, and that would make more sense there. I think by and large, all things considered equal, you're probably going with Worthy at that point. I want to touch on one more thing before we get out of segment 1, and that is your beloved Cowboys in Jalen Tolbert. Apparently, Nick Harris from DallasCowboys.com, again, he writes for the team, so take it for a grain of salt. Or you probably know more about Nick Harris than I do, but anytime somebody's writing for the team, I'm always like, okay, what's their angle here? What's their agenda? Anytime anybody's writing anything, I'm always like that. But especially when they're writing for the team, I'm like, okay, let's rein it in, Balky. Jalen Tolbert is the 1902 on average pick in the FFPC best ball tournament. We know that Ferguson is back. We know that Schoenmaker actually is hurt for quite a while, or maybe not quite a while. I'll let you weigh in on that. And then CeeDee Lamb is obviously still there. Michael Gallup is not there anymore.
Nope.
So you would think that Jalen Tolbert is going to get a larger share of the targets. However, you still have Brandon Cooks inexplicably there. I thought Brandon Cooks was only able to stay with one team for a year, and then he had to move on. Apparently that's not the case because he's in Dallas for another year this year. But your thoughts on Jalen Tolbert as a late, I mean, obviously you can make the case like, I want to get him in a few spots just to see what happens. But could you make a case that you want him more than in just a few spots in your best ball tournaments this year because of the draft capital that the Cowboys invested into him and the opportunity that is facing him this year that he didn't really have in 2023.
Right. And that's the thing with Tolbert. And, you mentioned Nick Harris, and, a lot of the guys that write and the beat writers in that local Dallas area are very kind of stern when it comes to the Cowboys coverage. They're not, they're not really sycophants to a degree. They don't really kind of write a lot of the puff pieces. They really kind of attack the team because they expect greatness as what they've been used to growing up in that area a lot of times. But So with Tolbert, you mentioned, the weight gain. He's even mentioned too. I believe I saw a report on him earlier today that he really kind of opened up a lot and talked about all the lost confidence that he had in his rookie season, where he come out of training camp, he was banged up, took him forever to really catch up to the scheme and what they were trying to do. And then last year with Mike McCarthy and they kind of installed a new offense after Kellen Moore departed, that learning curve was a little bit behind as well. But then you saw towards the end of the year, he started picking up a little bit. They went to him a little bit more in certain high leverage situations. Was good to see. Coming out of college, he was a guy that a lot of people were kind of touting. He had a lot of good combine measurements, testing, kind of things like that coming out of school down there in South Alabama. So Tolbert, he's in an intriguing spot now coming into 2024. You mentioned Gallup's gone. There's that third wide receiver spot that's fully open for a team that I'm expecting going to be passing the ball a ton in 2024. The volume is going to be there from Dak Prescott in this passing attack. And Jalen Tolbert could be a guy, you just mentioned it, 19th round is virtually free in drafts right now for you to take a shot at, put at the end of your roster, and hopefully something can pop off. But I'll also mention a name too that we'll probably see a little bit more as we get into training camp, that I'm expecting to kind of hear a little bit of buzz, hopefully as things go and practices start to kind of come off a little bit, and that's Ryan Flournoy. Ryan Flournoy is a guy that they drafted in the 7th round of the NFL draft this year, a guy that I'm very high on, rated at a 99 percentile in RAS score. Looks great. Looked great at the combine when I was there and watched all the testing. He's a guy that I was very intrigued on, and when they pulled the trigger on him at the end of the draft, I felt like he could really push Jalen Tolbert for that third wide receiver spot, and coinciding with that, that's going to help Jalen Tolbert hold that spot on the roster, earn the targets from the third wide receiver spot. And so I think that's definitely a buy at that 19th round ADP right now, because that offense is going to be throwing the ball a lot, like I said.
I think that, and that's the other thing too. It's like we talked about Prescott. Like, we know how the Cowboys feel about their running backs. And we'll get into the Titans in a little bit. It's throw. Like, we love that as fantasy owners. Like, maybe as Cowboys fans, you're not super enthused about that, but as fantasy owners, like, yeah, Lamb, Ferguson, Tolbert, Cooks, everybody sign me up. Maybe not Ezekiel Elliott, but that is just one of the names we will talk about when we come back from break. Elliott, Jalen Wright. Let's talk about Will Levis, as I just said. We'll talk about David Njoku too, Malachi Corley, Braylon Allen, a couple of Jets as well. He is Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller and the Woo Fantasy Podcast. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network rolls on next.
Is Dynasty. And the place to play is myffpc.com. Go to myffpc, use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. Now is the time to get in there and get set up with a startup draft. Now is the time, now that the rookies and everyone are set, because you can go in and you can start the draft, and you draft your Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases. And now that we know where the rookies are and where they're landing, you get going on that. So you want to try and set a startup draft for this week coming up if you're not involved yet. So go get involved. Use the QR code here or use the promo code that's in the link in the description here and get yourself going on Dynasty so you can really enjoy these players and draft the players you believe in. If you like Michael Penix Jr., you got to play Dynasty because you got to wait for him, but the payoff is big. And same with like Pearsall and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all these guys. Get in and do that. And I'll tell you what, the orphan leagues over there that we've been talking about, those all got bought up. They're actually all sold. People from this show I know took over a bunch of them. So right now, startups is the way to go. That's the way to rock and roll. It is startup season. Startup season and rookie draft season. That's what's up. Get set up at myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more and give you a leg up. No dealing with chasing around your friends and making them pay dues and having your buddy be like, oh, dude, I got to quit the league because I got a dog and I can't pay attention no more and I don't want to do trades. Forget all that. You can play online, MyFFPC, high stakes, low stakes, whatever you want to do with experts. And if somebody leaves the league, it goes in that orphan pool and somebody picks it up. The league has never been disbanded on FFPC.com. That's directly from Eric Balkman over there has told me that. So that's what's up. Get set up.
21 minutes until the top of the hour. You are watching the Better Sports Network's high-stakes fantasy football show presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I'm Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on the X. He is Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller and the Woo Fantasy Podcast. Check him out at Roto Superstar on the X. You know, that's an awfully, awfully flattering name that you picked for yourself on X. I'm just going to assume that somebody else dubbed you the Roto Superstar, Brandon, right?
Yeah, just a backstory to that. I got started in fantasy football back in 1996, fresh age of 14 years old. Got into a league with some guys that kind of lived in the neighborhood. A lot of older guys, you know, a little bit older than myself, just asked me to get involved in a fantasy league with them. And over the course of the first 2 to 3 years, I was immediately in there dominating and showing the stuff. And a couple of the guys that were in that league just started calling me Superstar. And so Superstar stuck. And then I get into the fantasy industry, you know, and then guys like Matthew Berry, you know, talented Mr. Roto. So I incorporated that. And then I first started writing with Roto Experts. Now I'm with RotoBaller. So the Roto Superstar merges at that point.
Roto Superstar. That's the etymology. I love it. And that makes perfect sense. We have to remind everybody that if you want to play in the Fantasy Pros Championship, you can do so at myffpc.com. We have drafts starting at the top of the hour here, and then we do have another one starting at 10 p.m. and another one at midnight tonight. If you want to register, scan that QR code that our producer Matt Deutsch has put on the screen. That will take you right to the registration page. If you already have an FFPC account, you can join the 10 o'clock draft tonight. You can join the midnight draft tonight. I'm commissioning both of those, so I'll see you in there. Or you can register for a slow draft, or you can register for another draft going on Memorial Day weekend as well. I know it's a busy weekend, spending time with family, remembering all of those fallen soldiers that have made our lives free. But at the same time, you can set aside a little bit of time for yourself. Hour and a half is usually what it takes. And you can draft for $1 million right here in May. $6 million prize pool. myffpc.com is where to go, or just scan the QR code on the screen. Let's get into some of the players that are being drafted in the Fantasy Football Players Championship, Fantasy Pros Championship right now. Derrick Henry is going at the end of the second round right now. Derrick Henry no longer with the Tennessee Titans. He's moved on to the Baltimore Ravens. Running back 8 at this point, going after Kyron Williams, going ahead of Achane and going ahead of Travis Etienne. Where do you stand on Derrick Henry as a late second-round pick, Brandon Murchison?
A quick sidebar before we get into that. I was going to mention, too, the Fantasy Pros Championship won my division last year.
Yes, you did.
So I will be coming back this year to defend my crown. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I'm just kind of deciding when I want to do my draft for this year for 2024. So wanted to kind of throw that out there too once you talked about the Fantasy Pros Championship.
Honestly, let me know and we'll pump it up on here and we can have viewers and listeners compete against you this year too. But yeah, congratulations.
Sounds great, man.
That
Fantastic.
It's no small feat to win your league. So that is awesome that you did that last year. And maybe this is the $1 million year for you, Brandon.
That's what we're hoping. I mean, I even ate through the slew of injuries of guys like Joe Burrow and things like that I drafted in that draft and worked through. But I digress. Moving on, getting into Derrick Henry as a second round pick. Obviously, I'm all over it this year with the offense that he's going into. I've got him ranked right now as my RB5 currently. I am very high on this situation. We saw last year, Gus Edwards scores 18 touchdowns on this Baltimore Ravens offense, and that's Gus Edwards. We're talking about Derrick Henry now, playing behind an offensive line that he's probably not had the chance to play behind over the course of the last few years with that very bad situation in Tennessee with the offensive line he's had the last 2 to 3 years. Now he's got a better offense that he's in, better offensive line, play calling that I think is going to be suited for him. And this is I think a chip on the shoulder type of season for a Derrick Henry. And I think he's going to explode first year in this offense with Baltimore Ravens. I have no qualms about taking him in the second round right now.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I should ask you, what are the 4 running backs you have in front of him? McCaffrey, Hall, Robinson, Gibbs?
Right now I have McCaffrey, Hall, Robinson, Taylor.
Okay. So why do you like Henry? But we already talked about Kyron Williams. Why do you like Henry better than Jamar Gibbs and Saquon Barkley, 2 guys that are going ahead of Henry in the FFPC best ball tournament right now?
Well, from Gibbs, it's more of kind of the fact that David Montgomery's still there. I mean, that's really the biggest thing. David Montgomery's going to factor into that offense. He's going to be the first running back out on the field with the first series for the Detroit Lions. So he's going to be the glorified starter. They're going to continue kind of split time between Gibbs and Montgomery. So I factor that into my decision-making when it comes to a guy like a Derrick Henry as well. You're sure you're going to get that upside from the passing standpoint with a guy like Gibbs. So that upside's going to be there. You have those in as well. But like I mentioned, the touchdown upside alone for a Derrick Henry in this offense is what puts him over the top and separates him. Not to mention the fact of the accumulation of yards that we're going to see from him in this offense. That's something that I'm looking at as well. With Saquon Barkley, new system coming in first year with the Eagles. I think it's going to be something for him. Production's going to go up. He's going to be a little bit more efficient for a Barkley this year. But what's the touchdown potential truly going to be with Jalen Hurts, the touchdown vulture from the goal line? Where's that upside going to be with Barkley? Is he going to be a guy that's going to get over 10 touchdowns, or is he going to be in that 7 to 9 range where Henry, like I said, that upside's so high with the potential of touchdowns on that offense? It just, for me, puts him over the top.
Yeah, and until they start running the tush push in Baltimore, which I don't think they're going to be doing, especially with the slim down Lamar Jackson.
Exactly.
Henry is the guy that you can make the case for. And I know touchdowns are fluky, but at the same time, we can understand why they'd be less fluky in Baltimore versus Philadelphia this year for sure. Let's move on and talk about David Njoku here. David Njoku last year was awesome for anybody who had him down the stretch with Joe Flacco. Flacco was a weird guy last year because he was pumping the ball down like he was the second coming of Jameis Winston, even though he was really the guy who came before Jameis Winston. He cared not for interceptions. He was just bombing it. And we loved that for fantasy owners. We loved it if we had Joe Flacco as our quarterback. We loved it if we had Cooper. We loved it if we had Njoku. If you look at Njoku's stats, like you can kind of tell when Watson was no longer the quarterback and when Flacco took over because Njoku's stats really took off. My concern this year, if we look at Njoku, is he being drafted based on what he did at the end of last season? Because quite frankly, he wasn't awesome with Deshaun Watson as his quarterback last year. And now he's going right next to Jake Ferguson, just behind George Kittle, ahead of guys like Brock Bowers and Dallas Goedert. Where do you stand on David Njoku at the 5-12 this year, Brandon?
For me, that's a little bit high. I'm going to probably look elsewhere when I'm targeting the tight end position. You mentioned, the splits is really the biggest thing when it comes to David Njoku. With Watson, I had this discussion yesterday with Laquan Jones that is, I work with at RotoBaller, and he threw out the stats to me as well because we talked about, what's the appropriate price when it comes to draft value for David Njoku, and I mentioned that fact altogether is those splits with Deshaun Watson and with Joe Flacco under center were night and day. So if you look last year with Watson, he played 6 games with Watson. The first 3 weeks, he went 4.4, 6.8, and 6 fantasy points in those games with Watson, where if you look towards the end of the season, he's double-digit scoring week in and week out with Joe Flacco under center. And I think that's going to be the telling point for me this year. David Njoku, can they increase the rapport between he and Watson? Is Watson really back is the other question. And then also they brought in Jerry Jeudy as well, another guy to take targets away from Njoku in this offense. So for me, all those factors into play, factoring in that draft ADP right now in that 5th round, I have other guys that I'll probably look to another round or 2 later to fill that need that I think will outproduce David Njoku.
I'm totally with you on this. I don't want to take Njoku at the end of the 5th round. I'd rather take Bowers at the end of the 6th. I'd rather take Dallas Goedert in the mid 7th. Hawkinson is an interesting guy because I still, as weird as it is to say this, he's going in the 9th round. I still think that's too high based on his injury, and I'm not convinced he comes back as good as everybody thinks that that he's going to come back from. By the way, Bill Hollywood chiming in on YouTube right now. How long do you get for slow drafts in the Fantasy Pros Championship drafts that I already talked about? We have two different options for slows. There is a 2-hour option and a 6-hour option for slow drafts there. So if you want to sign up and play for $1 million, you can do that live with a 60-second timer, but you can also do it with a 2-hour clock and a 6-hour clock. Now, the player that is going basically right next to David Njoku is Jake Ferguson, tight end 9 at the end of the 5th round. This is one of your beloved Cowboys. And actually, I'm wearing my UW Badgers sweatshirt tonight. He is a former Badger as well. The thing with Ferguson is, and I've heard a lot of people talk about this, saying he's overdrafted, not because he's not going to put up points, but because they don't see him as a difference maker, as a superior athlete. He's not elite at anything. And while I kind of agree with all that, I'm also of the opinion that I'm talking about waiting after the first 9 tight ends or 8 tight ends are off the board to take one at the end of the 5th round in a tight end premium format. I'm okay with him not being the best effort. Like, I'm okay because of what he did last year, because they let Tony Pollard go to the Titans, because they don't have a real running game as it stands right now in Dallas. They are going to be throwing. And Jake Ferguson was a huge part of this last year. If anything, his target share should go up. I don't think it goes down. Where do you stand on Jake Ferguson, Brandon Murchison?
I love me some Jake Ferguson. And it goes back to when Dallas was going to let Dalton Schultz walk. I saw kind of the tea leaves back then, and with Dalton Schultz moving on, I was heavily on X, Twitter, whichever one you want to call it. Go get Jake Ferguson. This guy is going to be the next good tight end, great tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. And we saw that kind of come to fruition last year. He tied for second at the position with 9 targets in the red zone. And he was a guy that was really heavily featured and really all year long. And what it comes down to it is the fact that he's Dak Prescott's binky. He's a little blanky. That's the thing with Dak Prescott that we've seen over the years is when the pressure's on and he kind of feels the pressure, coming from the defensive line, he's looking for his first outlet. And a lot of times it's that tight end. It goes back to Dalton Schultz and that situation there. Jake Ferguson's a guy you mentioned, the recency bias. A lot of people were kind of skeptical. Can he repeat those numbers? And you even mentioned with the athletics, a lot of people turned off by that because he doesn't do anything special. When it comes to fantasy football, you don't have to have a guy that's athletically special. Give me targets, give me receptions, give me touchdowns, and that's what Jake Ferguson is going to do in 2024. Book it. He's going to be a guy that's going to be pushing for that top 5, top 6 tight end position at the end of 2024 this year. I'm all over Jake Ferguson right now.
Expectations change when you're not taking tight end 1 in the 2nd round. With taking Kelsey or Laporta or Andrews or Kincaid, you are expecting much more from those players because of the draft capital you are paying for those players. When you talk about waiting after 8 of these guys are off the board and you get Ferguson at the end of the 5th round, your expectations change and you don't have to need everything that you're expecting for all these big time tight ends. You can get Ferguson there. He can plug a hole for you in your lineup. You can flex him out. You can play him at tight end, whatever you want to do. I think that's interesting with Ferguson there. Okay, let's move on and talk about. I don't want to say I want to go through rapid fire, but I want to try to get through as many of these guys as we can. 1103 is Ezekiel Elliott right now. He is the earliest Cowboys running back off the board. He is going basically a round and a half ahead of Rico Dowdle. He is going 9 rounds, almost 10 rounds ahead of Deuce Vaughn, who is basically a 20th round YOLO pick. You're looking at Ezekiel Elliott as the top Cowboys running back off the board. Where do you stand on him at running back 39 at the 10-11 turn?
I would say appropriately priced currently with Ezekiel Elliott. And I think if you're going to look at a guy like Elliott and you're potentially thinking about drafting him, the best way to go about it is from a hero running back standpoint. You could say from a zero running back draft strategy standpoint as well, is waiting into that round when you're getting into round 10, 11 in that range and doing the double dip, getting Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle, because I think that's going to be a 50-50 split truly with those 2 running backs this year. We saw the efficiency standpoint with Ezekiel Elliott last year in New England look terrible. He's obviously lost a step. Now we could also talk about with that offense in general and how bad it was. But for me, coming back to Dallas, the familiarity and how much, Jerry Jones and the team really, admires him and loves him, they're going to put him on the field. He's going to be on the field in high leverage situations. And, like someone pointed out in the chat as well, is he was Dak Prescott's binky as well in his time in Dallas too. So I think that's something that keep in mind when you're grabbing a guy like Ezekiel Elliott. I think he's going to be a guy that is going to get those dump offs, going to get that 35 to 45 reception total. And for me, if I'm going to get an Elliott, I would want to get Rico Dowdle too and kind of hedge myself from that standpoint.
Yeah, that's my man, Jimmy Williams, chiming in with that. I will see you in Louisville, Jimmy, for the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship coming up in about 2 months here. Very excited to draft in that as well. Jalen Wright, Miami running backs here. Devon Achane, running back 9 at the 302, paying a premium price for him. Raheem Mostert, running back 29 at the 807. That's about 5.5 rounds later. And then you see Jalen Wright after that at the 1111, running back 43. Here's how I see this, and I'll let you weigh in. Raheem Mostert has probably got his own little office in the trainer's room in Miami at this point of his career. The fact, and this is how sharp FFPC drafters are, because Raheem Mostert, what did he run for? Like 87 touchdowns last year, and he's still being drafted in the 8th round this year. Now, Devon Achane, I'm fine with, but that's another guy that gets dinged up. Again, a speed merchant playing running back, like that's not exactly a great way to stay healthy. You're telling me, I know he's a 3rd-string running back, but Jalen Wright, running back 43, the 11-11, I think a lot of the arguments that you're making with Ezekiel Elliott, whether it be hero RB or whether it be zero RB, Jalen Wright at the 11-12 turn, Brandon, I really, really like that. I don't want to say league winner because I think that term is tossed around way too much. He might be a league winner, though.
He might be, and that's the thing, is the Dolphins traded up 20 spots in the draft to get this guy. Mike McDaniel loves speed, and that's what Jalen Wright brings to the table. I saw it firsthand at Tennessee. I live in Tennessee, big Tennessee Vols fan, so I saw it firsthand with Jalen Wright, and his skill set translating to the NFL is amazing. I think he fits in great with this offense. Mike McDaniel's going to find creative ways to get him the ball and get him on the field. Now, will it be with a volume aspect in 2024? Probably not. So getting him at the 11th round like that, I think it's stealing right now because he's going to find the field. You mentioned it. Achane last year banged up. Raheem Mostert, who knows when he's going to get hurt, but he will get hurt and he will miss some time. And at that point, if a guy like Jalen Wright gets on the field and can accumulate touches, we might look at a Wally Pipp situation here in this situation, and Jalen Wright's going to take that backfield over and be the guy moving forward. So for me, from a value standpoint, I'd be more adept to drafting a Jalen Wright than I would, especially Devon Achane at where he's going in draft right now.
Yeah, that's the issue. And like I drafted some Achane early, and I'm fine with it. I didn't know they were going to get Jalen Wright. Maybe I should have, because all Mike McDaniel does is draft speed. But at this point, like I could not be further from Achane. Like it just doesn't make sense for me. I'd much rather take a guy like Wright 9 rounds later, and who knows the difference in touches between Wright and Achane. I don't think it's going to be 9 rounds worth of touches. No. So that's why I like him there. Let's move on and talk about one of your boys here, Jermaine Burton, from Georgia to Alabama, now to Cincinnati. We know the T. Higgins situation. It sounds like he is going to be playing this year, but that's what it sounds like. It's not official. And I think for Dynasty, it's interesting too, because if Higgins moves on after this year, all of a sudden Burton could step in to be the number 2 receiver in an offense that features Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase taking coverage away from him on the outside. The key thing to remember with Burton is, people look at the draft capital. I don't think there was ever any question about the talent with Jermaine Burton. I think the question was off the field stuff. And we saw players like Tyreek Hill, and I'm not comparing him to Tyreek Hill, but we saw Tyreek Hill, a guy that never should have been a 4th or 5th round pick, whatever he was, but he dropped down that far because of off the field stuff, right? And people who take the chance on it, sometimes it works out. Jermaine Burton, while you can't draft him in the NFL like the Bengals did, you still can draft him for your FFPC team in the 15th round right now. Give us the sell on why Jermaine Burton is a must draft this year.
Well, the thing is with Jermaine Burton, and we kind of saw it last year, and I was touting it until the cows come home last year in 2023, is fit for the player and their type of, their skill set and what they bring to the table. I was a big proponent of what Puka Nacua could do last year in that fit with Sean McVay in that offense, and we saw what happened last year. Jermaine Burton coming into Cincinnati with this offense, and you mentioned, a lot of the factors kind of coming into play too as well with T. Higgins and that contract situation. Will it come into play in 2024? To be continued, because we don't know how that's going to look. He could get he could not sign his tender. He could not want to play this year. He could get moved on from early this year or even at the trade deadline this year. But for all accounts, I feel like he will be out in Cincinnati when it comes to 2025. And for a guy like Jermaine Burton, I talked to him at the scouting combine, had a chance to kind of sit down and ask him a few questions. Great kid, very personable, and just from sitting down and talking to the guy there, you could tell he really wants to make a point that these off-field concerns are kind of something that's behind him. And we're even seeing it, hype videos on X right now and things like that with Burrow, deep shots to Burton. That particular skill set coming from Alabama, talented receivers come from Alabama. Like we go to the store and buy groceries. Right. And so him coming into the NFL now with this offense, with Joe Burrow, I think it's just the perfect marriage. And whether it be this year, I think with that price point in that 15-round range, you're getting a guy that's going to be a high upside leverage play down the road, barring injury and things of that, with like T. Higgins possibly maybe missing time. But we even saw with Tyler Boyd over the last few years, consistency, always getting targets in this offense, was always getting looked at. And I think that's going to be something that Jermaine Burton can kind of come in and fill that role early now in 2024. But from a dynasty aspect, if you're looking further down the road as the wide receiver 2 in this offense, my goodness, you're looking at a high upside wide receiver 2 right here on skill set alone.
Yeah, I totally agree. And he was a guy that, and Jimmy Williams points this out in the YouTube chat, Burton has the physical and on-field traits to be the wide receiver 2 there, but he has to keep his head in the game. I like him. And the thing that I like about that comment from Jimmy is when you're talking about a player like that, when I think about Antonio Brown, who's in the news for the wrong reasons lately, but I think about a player like that where it's like, yeah, I'd like to take a chance on him, but I don't want to draft him that high. I mean, he's 15th round in the FFPC best ball tournament. In some of my leagues now, as my dynasty rookie drafts have been going on, he keeps creeping higher and higher to the point where he's going significantly higher than some of the other receivers that were drafted in front of him. But I still think he's worth the risk. You're talking about a late second round, early third round pick in your dynasty drafts. You're talking about a 15th round pick. If the only thing is, he's got to keep his head on straight. He's got to be behaved off the field. If that's the only thing and you're not questioning the role, the talent, anything like that, then take the chance and draft him. Because if it doesn't work out, it's a 15th round pick. It's a third round rookie pick. You wash your hands of it and you move on. But this is a perfect example of another, again, not a league winner, but a guy that can really help you win leagues, if that makes any sense. Okay, one other thing I want to get to, and it's a pair of players, and they're both on the New York Jets. Malachi Corley, who I know you love, was drafted by, and there was a lot, and I'll tell you this too, doing a lot of these shows prior to the NFL draft, Brandon, I would ask dynasty players and pundits in the industry, like, who do you like? Who's one dynasty player you want to get in all your rookie drafts? I wouldn't say Malachi Corley was number one, but he had to be close to being the number one choice that a lot of these players are saying that they wanted, and now he goes to the Jets. Aaron Rodgers was talking about Braylon Allen. Calling him a monster. And now it seems like he has the inside track to being the backup to Breece Hall in New York, which is significant if that Jets offense is back this year. And I know they invested that high first-round pick into the offensive lineman, Alu Fashanu. I think I'm getting the name right.
Yep, Fashanu.
Fashanu, yeah. And so if the Jets offensive line's better, Rodgers' Achilles is healed. He's got Garrett Wilson. He's got Mike Williams. He's got Malachi Corley. He's got Breece Hall. And now he's got Braylon Allen. Braylon Allen, this is a guy the guy behind the guy, right? Old it's Swingers, I think, was the reference. So we went to get the guy behind the guy.
Right.
That's Braylon Allen at this point. Malachi Corley and Allen, 16th and 19th round, respectively, in the FFPC best ball tournament. Pretty good ways to spend your late round draft capital.
I don't think there's been a single show that I've done since January where I've not talked about and talked up Malachi Corley. going back to watching those Western Kentucky games last year during the 2023 season, and then getting, when he gets down to the Senior Bowl and shows out, and then just continues to look amazing down there from all standpoints, whether what he's doing on the field. And now he's in the NFL, he's gotten onto the field, and Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers, these guys are talking him up, and it's already giving me the feeling like they're going to get the ball in his hands. And I had put this on X just the other day. It gives me the vibes like it feels like they're going to work him into this offense similar to a Randall Cobb in his prime with Green Bay. Move him around the field, put him in the backfield. They're going to find ways to get him the ball, and that's going to be a trusted second option in this offense from a receiver standpoint that they've not really had in New York in quite some time. Let's be honest, they didn't really have much last year once Aaron Rodgers went down anyways. So for me, I am going to be so overweight on exposure to Malachi Corley because of the upside I think he brings with that translatable skill set to the NFL. So, but on the other side of the coin, Braylon Allen, like you mentioned, I kind of look at this as a situation like he's kind of a cheaper version of an A.J. Dillon with Green Bay. That bigger body, short yardage type of back that they'll use when they need to use him. And whether or not they want to kind of take a lot of that workload off. We talked about Travis Etienne earlier and where it is out of camp. No TAs. They want to reduce his workload this year to try to avoid any type of injuries mounting and piling up. They might want to do that with Breece Hall and put Braylon Allen on the field a little bit more as the season progresses. So for me, that's the only way I'm going to look at a Braylon Allen. But you mentioned draft capital wise towards the end of that draft, he's kind of a guy that's a handcuff that you can get. And if something were to happen to a Breece Hall, you have that secondary option there that could really bleed into being I won't call it a league winner type, but gives you a running back that you've gotten for free in drafts that you now are utilizing in your starting lineup week in and week out.
I will say this about Braylon Allen. I was super excited to see him as a Badgers fan his freshman year, 17 years old, and he's just pummeling linebackers in the Big Ten. It never should have happened. Never should have happened, but it did. So then expectations go up, right? And then it just seemed like every year he didn't – it seemed like every year – and it's probably Wisconsin people watching that are going to fry me for this. He started playing smaller than he actually was.
Yeah.
And then he gets to that final year, and I don't hold this against him as much because it was a brand new offense, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, new everything. And to his credit, he caught a lot of passes his last year in Wisconsin.
Yes.
This is something we've seen before, like James White, Melvin Gordon. They always, can these guys catch Jonathan Taylor? Can these guys catch passes? And I don't know if Wisconsin goes out of their way to do this, but it always seems like their last year in Madison, these guys end up catching a lot more passes before they go to the NFL. But regarding Braylon Allen and how he makes it in the NFL, I used to think he was a special player. I don't necessarily think he's a special player anymore, but I don't think he has to be. I think if that Jets offensive line's improved, and I think if Breece Hall were to ever go, I don't think you can really start him with any kind of confidence.
No.
And we're talking mostly with best ball, but let's just switch to redraft here for a second. I don't think you can ever start him with any kind of confidence while Hall is healthy. However, if Hall is out, I think he's capable enough to be a top 15 running back for you that week. I think he could get into the end zone. I think he's big enough to handle those goal line carries. I think he's big enough. He's not the type of, like these old running backs where it's like you need 1 yard, he'll get you 3. You need 3 yards, he'll get you 3. You need 7 yards, he'll get you 3. He's not that type of guy, right? Like there's still some talent there. But I will tell you, I'm much less excited about Braylon Allen's professional career than I was 3 years ago when I saw him as a freshman. He could prove me wrong. There's plenty of these guys that, were kind of underwhelming in college that crushed it in the pros. And I'm certainly hoping for that, given I took him in a few dynasty leagues too as well. So that's where I stand on Braylon Allen. That's where you stand on Braylon Allen. We have to move on to our next segment. We're going to talk about draft targets and fades. We're going to talk about these injuries to Kyron Williams and Michael Pittman and OTAs, how they should be affecting how you're drafting them right now. We'll talk about the recovery from an injury from Joe Burrow, Kyle Pitts in the new offense as well. We'll probably get into some Jonathan Brooks, and I want to talk with you about Christian Watson as well, if time allows. Hopefully it will. We got much more for you on the Better Sports Network. You're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere.
Is Dynasty. And the place to play is myffpc.com. Go to myffpc, Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. Now is the time to get in there and get set up with a startup draft. Now is the time, now that the rookies and everyone are set, because you can go in and you can start the draft and, you draft your Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases. And now that we know where the rookies are and where they're landing, you get going on that. So you want to try and set a startup draft for this week coming up if you're not involved yet. So go get involved. Use the QR code here or use the promo code that's in the link in the description here and get yourself going on Dynasty so you can really enjoy these players and draft the players you believe in. If you like Michael Penix Jr., you got to play Dynasty because you got to wait for him, but the payoff is big. And same with like Pearsall and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all these guys. Get in and do that. And I'll tell you what, the orphan leagues over there that we've been talking about, those all got bought up. They're actually all sold. People from this show I know took over a bunch of them. So right now, startups is the way to go. That's the way to rock and roll. It is startup season. Startup season and rookie draft season. That's what's up. Get set up at myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more and give you a leg up. No dealing with chasing around your friends and making them pay dues and having your buddy be like, oh, dude, I got to quit the league because I got a dog and I can't pay attention no more and I don't want to do trades. Forget all that. You can play online, MyFFPC, high stakes, low stakes, whatever you want to do with experts. And if somebody leaves the league, it goes in that orphan pool and somebody picks it up. The league has never been disbanded on FFPC.com. That's directly from Eric Balkman over there has told me that. So that's what's up.
I don't want to say it was a landmark week at the FFPC, but I will tell you that we introduced FFPC Empire Leagues for the first time this year. And this past week, I think we filled our 50th Empire League. I'm a little surprised that it has caught on, but people love it. And you ask, well, Balky, what's an Empire League? An Empire League is a dynasty league, basically on steroids. What it is half the pot set aside every single year. And then once one team wins back-to-back years, they not only win that year's first place prize, but they win the entire Empire pot that is accumulated over the course of that Empire League. After that, the league is disbanded. You can you can join a new Empire League, and you will get your deposit back as well. It is better than a Michael Scott win-win-win. It is a win-win-win-win with FFPC Empire Leagues. They are live now at myffpc.com. Check them out. Progressive prize pools with dynasty leagues. Who wouldn't love it? myffpc.com, myffpc.com. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He is Brandon Murchison from the RotoBaller, rotoballer.com, and the Woo Fantasy Podcast. How often does the Woo Fantasy Podcast come out, Brandon?
Well, getting kind of back into the swing of things. Had some stuff taken care of here personally the last few weeks. So kind of been out a little bit out of the habit. Going to try to get back into kind of doing some things over the course of the summer, try to do some shows like every Tuesday night. That's what I'm hoping to do. Maybe some short form podcasts, get some guys over into the YouTube channel, maybe a guest here and there. My normal co-host that I have, bring him on. We talk really about every single thing, whether it's, fantasy football, whether spitting a little bit of baseball stuff too, like we did at the top of the show, just kind of all encompassing thing. But we want to try to get back in the swing of things, one episode a week, get everybody ready for drafts as we're getting into the full swing summer draft season for fantasy football. And
check him out at Roto Superstar on the X, posting. I assume you just post every time you post a new podcast. That's up on your X. People can listen to it there. You will get great insight on that podcast like you're about to get on Kyron Williams right now. Kyron Williams is going at the 209 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. This is after we found out Sean McVay says he's dealing with a foot injury right now. Again, this is May, and maybe you can weigh in on this, Brandon, of how we treat injuries that are reported in OTAs. I know I'm freaking out about the Packers. Their starting right tackle and their backup tight end both tore their pectoral muscles lifting weights in the offseason, and nobody's talking about that right now. This is significant. But Kyron Williams right now dealing with the foot injury. He's going at the 209. Now, if we look at just the Rams backfield in general, I think I am a little bit more likely to take Blake Corum I shouldn't say little. I'm a lot more likely to take Blake Corum in the middle of the 11th round. Kyren Williams, I know it's early, but it's a foot. It's the 209. I feel like people are drafting him based on what he did last year rather than what he's going to do this year. To me, he's a fade at that point. How do you feel about him?
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's really like I keep touching on recency bias. It's May 23rd. Everybody remembers that vaunted stretch down the end of the season last year where he was considered a league winner in most formats just because of volume, usage, and the production that he brought to the table. Now you mentioned, Sean McVay mentions the foot injury. Let's take that with a grain of salt. It is May 23rd, of course, obviously, but it is a foot injury for a running back. That is typically something I don't like the sound of that because that could lead into something. We're not going to call it Liz Frank, but who knows how truthful they're being right now with that injury. And that could be something that lingers into training camp. And if it does, his price point that you're taking him at right now at 2.9 in fantasy drafts, ooh, mama, we're not on board with that. That's a losing pick at that point. And coinciding with that, you get all these glowing reports from Sean McVay and the offense and offensive coordinator talking about Blake Corum and what he can bring to the table. And just earlier today, I know there was a report out that they said they wanted him to work on his pass blocking techniques and his pass catching abilities and bring those up to speed. And if Blake Corum starts to kind of get into this offense, get onto the field more and kind of break into that usage that was so much of a helpful thing for Kyren Williams last year down the stretch, you're not really getting the production you think you're getting out of a guy you're drafting in the second round.
Dominic Gazzetti, our good buddy, is chiming in on the YouTube chat with the opposition here to this, and I think he makes some good points. I'm against the grain here, but I don't see how we can fade Kyren. Nothing's changed for the worse in Los Angeles, and they love Kyren. Isn't it plausible to think Blake Corum is needed depth mainly, and it's May? Isn't it plenty of time for a full recovery? So let's unpack this a little bit because I think these are interesting. Nothing's changed for the worse for the Rams, I would agree, but it has changed for the worse with Kyren Williams. When you add Blake Corum, and people want to talk about, I don't know, whatever it was, a third-round pick, right?
Third round pick. Yep.
So it's a third round or whatever. Well, there's a pretty decent history of second and third round running backs hitting at a, I don't want to say a high rate, but at a substantial rate in their rookie years. So that's red flag number one. So I think that changes for Williams. I also think one of the things that could very easily change is I think Williams was hitting above his weight last year, as you pointed out. Like, we're talking about a player that came basically out of nowhere. I drafted him in like the 16th round of leagues last year just because I didn't trust Cam Akers, and I wanted, again, the guy behind the guy, the injury away type guy, not because I liked Williams, just because he was the next guy up. And he so outperformed what I expected from him. He so outperformed what his metrics, his analytics, his testing at the combine and everything, his tape, and Notre Dame would say. To me, I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think it's necessarily repeatable. To the injury aspect, it's May. Isn't it plenty of time for a full recovery? Dominic, yes, it is plenty of time for a full recovery, unless the injury is more serious than Sean McVay's letting up, and then we don't know, right? And I don't want to tell people to draft scared. I don't draft scared. That doesn't win $1 million. That doesn't win $100,000. That doesn't win $300,000. But at the same time, draft smart. Now, if you view Kyren Williams as a guy that's going to return mid to late second round value, then there's nothing wrong with him there. But Brandon, for me, and I think what you're saying as well, it's very difficult for me to tell myself a plausible story that has me saying, it goes back to the, I think I brought this up on the show before, Jim Gaffigan, the comedian, he talks about hot pockets a lot. And he's like, I've never had a hot pocket. And then after I got done eating, I was like, gee, I'm really glad I ate that, Right. And this is sort of like the Kyren Williams thing. Like, if I draft him at the 209, I don't really envision myself after the season saying, yeah, gee, I'm really glad I drafted him at the 209. Maybe he pays off there, but then you're drafting him like there's no value there. You're drafting him at his ceiling. And at that point, I want to go elsewhere with this because I see more red flags. I see a lower floor. And I could be wrong, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it you have to put this on a scale, really, when it comes to it. drafting him at this position, he has to essentially repeat his production from last year in 2024 to pay off that ADP that you're paying the price for right now. Can he do that while also staying on the field, not getting banged up, not missing time? He's already nursing a foot injury, so we've got that in play. But then you put on the scale the comparisons between he and Blake Corum. Blake Corum has the higher draft capital. Team's probably going to be more adept, want him on the field because they paid a little bit more of a heftier price for him in the draft. And Blake Corum also is the better player when it comes to skill set and upside from a production standpoint. I like Blake Corum more than you like Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams was a guy that tested horribly at the combine coming in the NFL and really kind of dinged his status. And we saw it last year. His production really came from the standpoint of volume. And he has to maintain that volume to pay off that price from a production standpoint, while also having a rookie who might be more talented than he is breathing down his neck. And for me, injury to his foot right now, I'm not even worried about that. I'm not even really discussing that. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of, can he withhold the rookie from taking valuable opportunities away from him throughout the season and down the stretch when you need him the most?
I think the other thing I'll bring up, and we'll cap the Kyron Williams conversation on this. I play in a private Dynasty league with several other high-stakes FFPC Dynasty players. And again, this is Dynasty. It's not redraft. But I have Kyron Williams in that league. And even towards the end of last season, because my team was going nowhere, I tried to punt on him and get what I could. Couldn't get anything for Kyron Williams. Like, there's not a whole lot of people that I know who have been successful fantasy players that are believing in Kyron Williams this year. Yeah. The fact that his ADP is that high, obviously there are people who believe in him, but it's not me. It's not Brandon. We're moving on. Michael Pittman, let's talk about him. Shane Steichen talked about this, according to James Boyd on X, that his knee injury should be fine. He collided with Jalen Jones, the cornerback, in OTAs. Apparently Pittman went down pretty hard. Steichen was not overly concerned, but I mean, he's a coach. He's trained to have a poker face on at this point. Pittman had a huge season last year with Gardner Minshew as his quarterback after Anthony Richardson went down. The Cowboys did add Adonai Mitchell. They still have Josh Downs. I don't view either of these guys as big-time threats for Michael Pittman's fantasy output this year. What I do view as probably the biggest threat is a healthy Anthony Richardson all season, because if Anthony Richardson is healthy, this is a guy that has a nose for the end zone. This is a guy that has a really significant pair of legs that can chew up a lot of yardage. Gardner Minshew didn't have that last year, and now Pittman's going at the 309. Is he a target or a fade for you at this point? And you can incorporate the injury if you think it's worth talking about.
Injury, I'm not really too concerned about. Just kind of, bumps and bruises that kind of happen in training camp or OTAs, things like that. But so kind of going back to the previous point from in the chat, he has plenty of time to recover. Mm-hmm. So, but when it comes to his price right now, 3.9, Michael Pittman, he's a guy that I've currently got ranked wide receiver 15. So based on how drafts are kind of unfolding, I think that's around about the point in a draft where you're going to look at a guy like Michael Pittman. So from a price standpoint, ADP wise, I think that's appropriate. So depending on the build of your roster and how you want to shake out things early on in the draft, I think that's a good point to grab a guy like Michael Pittman. The biggest cause for concern, like you mentioned too, is just the splits. The splits with that small sample size with Anthony Richardson compared to, YOLO ball Gardner Minshew last year towards the end of the years, where they were, Gardner's just out there chucking that ball all over the field. And that's where we saw a lot of target accumulation for a guy like Michael Pittman. Can he do that with Anthony Richardson? Full off season, learning the system, really kind of acclimating into the NFL. I think we talked about Richardson earlier. I think there's going to be that step forward and a progression for Pittman and Richardson here in the second year with Richardson in the Colts offense. Do I believe he's going to have that upside as far as a target and reception standpoint type of guy? Not as much, but I think the touchdown potential can be there, because I think this Colts offense is going to be a team that's going to get down there in scoring position quite often. So that potential from a touchdown standpoint, I think, is going to be there for Pittman, in which he can pay off that ADP at 309 right now.
Think about the the NFC South and how it used to be so wide open with the offenses with Carolina, Atlanta, New Orleans, Tampa Bay over the past few years. I wonder if the AFC South is like going to be that this year, because you have the Colts where they invested into Mitchell, right? You have the Texans, obviously Stroud flying high, and then they go ahead and get Stephon Diggs. You still have the Jaguars who, they lost a couple pieces, but they did bring in a first-round pick in Brian Thomas. They did bring in Gabe Davis. And, of course, the Titans who let go of Henry and now have loaded up with Ridley. And they've loaded up with – and they still got Burks and Hopkins and one other guy. Oh, Tyler Boyd. They added as well. And Tony Pollard, the pass guy. That could be a very interesting division. We talk about, like, schedules and drafting, based on Week 17 and so on and so forth. Like, that's an interesting division to watch as well. Brandon, I do this show every week with a different co-host every week. Yeah. And try to hit on different players every week because we do have a lot of the same audience coming back and watching every week. Yeah. So I need to talk about different players. There's one player that I don't think really applies to not being, not talking about him for a week. I want to talk about him every single week, and it's Kyle Pitts in Atlanta. Kyle, because this is a tight end premium format, is like, even if this wasn't tight end premium with the FFPC that we're talking on the show, he would be incredibly compelling just on his physical tools and what he was able to do his rookie year. And every single year, somebody usually has a strong opinion on Pitts. It's very rare that somebody comes on the show and is like, yeah, I don't know. He could be good. Who knows with him? A lot of people are like, yeah, he's going to be God's gift to fantasy football this year. Or this guy is the biggest waste of space. You cannot draft him. And so I wanted to talk about him this year. Again, a polarizing player going at the 311 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament. New quarterback this year, new offense, no Arthur Smith. You would think things are pointing up that Falcons exercised his fifth-year option as well. You would think things are pointing up, but oftentimes in Kyle Pitts' career, when it seems like everything is pointing up, that's when the big letdown comes. I don't know. Where do you stand on him? Is he a draft or a fade for you? Fade, excuse me.
For me, he's going to be a draft, and he's definitely a guy that I'm going to target this year because I think, tight end premium type of drafts, obviously you're going to pick him up a little bit earlier. The 311 is, appropriately priced, I think, for where he's going to be kind of selected in a lot of these drafts as we move through the summer. For me, and I even put it out, I put this out on X the other day, the biggest key for him, obviously, is going to be the pickup in quarterback plays, the change in quarterback play. Bringing Kirk Cousins in, I went in, dug into the numbers, and over the course of the last 2 years with the quarterback play that he was having to suffer through, he had a grand total of, I believe, 90 catchable targets over the course of the last 2 years. Kyle Pitts had with Atlanta.
That's incredible. That is incredible.
Combined, but then last year alone, TJ Hawkinson had 99 catchable targets from Kirk Cousins. That. If you give Kyle Pitts 90 to 95 catchable targets, you're looking at a guy that's going to be in that 75 to 80 type, catch season. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing is he's going to produce. He's going to score. Kirk Cousins brings a whole nother facet to this offense that, just from a consistency standpoint, 3 and outs are going to kind of be out off the table to a degree. Bijan Robinson is going to take a lot of that pressure off of the passing attack. Much better than what we've been accustomed to and what we as fantasy managers have had to suffer through during the Arthur Smith era. I think now Pitts, to me, I think is a guy that's going to finally bring back that hope of a tight end, top 5 tight end that we thought we were getting when he came into the NFL. This is the year that you're going to want to draft Kyle Pitts.
Jimmy Williams chiming in. He's with you. I'm in on Pitts too. Cousins, as you stated, has no problem throwing to the tight end. This is the year of Kyle Pitts. Acquire him in Dynasty. Do whatever you can to grab him on your teams because I think this could be a big-time year for him. Jonathan Brooks, again, another rookie I want to center on, going at the 708 in the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, not facing a ton. Okay, this is weird. He's facing a ton of competition, but not a ton of competition in Carolina, right? There's a lot of bodies there, but nobody is like, oh my God, how's he going to beat out Hubbard? How is he going to beat out Rashad Penny or whatever? Nobody's saying that right now. So Jonathan Brooks at the 708. And the other wrinkle we need to throw into this too, I don't know how you feel about him tearing the ACL in November, how healthy he's going to be. To me, he strikes me as a player that is going to be huge in 2025. 2024, I'm not sure when we're talking about a mid-7th round pick. Is he a target or a fade for you?
Well, for me, he would be a target, and I think he's going to be good to go come training camp. And the reason being is, and I talked about it a lot through the offseason, the Cowboys were slated to take him in the NFL draft in the 2nd round. That was the easy money. A lot of the betting markets were on, the Cowboys taking Jonathan Brooks at 56, but then the Carolina Panthers shock us all and take him earlier in the 2nd round. But a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff is that the Cowboys team doctor was the guy that did the surgery on Jonathan Brooks for that ACL surgery back in November. So they stayed with him and watched along through the process of the healing and the rehab, and they have firsthand knowledge of where he was at and how he was going to be ready to go. They were comfortable taking him in the 2nd round. So if the team doctors for Dallas were ready to take him and felt like he was going to be available and ready and not have any setbacks whatsoever, then I believe the Carolina Panthers are going to be in good shape with him. The biggest thing with Jonathan Brooks in this offense is the Dave Canales angle. And Dave Canales, we saw last year, got the most out of Rachaad White with Tampa Bay. He's done that in the past, especially from a quarterback standpoint as well. So I think that you're going to see an uptick in this Carolina Panthers offense. They're going to be a little bit more efficient. And for Jonathan Brooks, a guy that can do it all, catch passes out of the backfield, is an outstanding runner. We've seen that as well. I think he's a guy that you're going to want to draft, and you can get him at an appropriate price right now too.
With regards to with Brooks, okay, how much do you compare the Javonte Williams ACL and the Jonathan Brooks ACL, right? Because Williams was a guy that we heard really good things about, and this obviously wasn't his rookie season. This was after his rookie season. We heard really good things about, and he was doing everything. He was ready. He played, but he kind of underwhelmed a little bit. How much of it sounds like that concern for you with Brooks is much more minimal, right?
Definitely, yeah, because I think we saw multiple ligaments injured with Javonte Williams, where with Jonathan Brooks, it was kind of just a simple clean tear with the ACL, a little bit quicker, a little bit easier to kind of come back from. And that alone, I think he's going to be more sped up through the process as far as being ready to go. And like you mentioned, just the competition alone, there's just not much there. They'll ease him in. So you'll want to, if you do draft him, kind of temper your expectations early on in the season, kind of similar to what we saw with Breece Hall last year. I'm not saying he's going to produce Breece Hall numbers by the end of 2024, but we saw the Jets kind of ease Breece Hall in. Yeah, he wasn't really worked in too much early on in the season, but when it came time to really kind of take the shackles off, so to speak, Breece Hall's on the field, demanded the touches in that backfield, and I think that's what you're going to see with Brooks, especially in crunch time when fantasy managers are going to need that the most as you're trying to push for a playoff chance, title contention. Brooks is going to be a guy that's going to be there for you towards the end of the year.
The other thing I'm going to bring up here in regards to Christian Watson. So I'm in Northeast Wisconsin. I'll give you what I know about this. According to Packers.com, prior to this season, Christian Watson had already spent tens of thousands of dollars of his own money to try to figure out what his soft tissue injuries, were caused, what they were caused by. Now, the University of Wisconsin-Madison got a grant, or they're among one of the universities that got a grant, like a $4 million grant to study soft tissue injuries, stuff like this that Watson has been having among the elite athletes in the NFL. Christian Watson and then Eric Stokes, who was a first-round cornerback drafted out of LSU by the Packers a few years ago, both went down to Madison. They spent some time down there. Christian Watson's dad put out on X about a month and a half ago that the doctors did find something and that they're already treating it. They've got him on some sort of program. Watson spoke with reporters at OTAs, and apparently what they found was that his right hamstring, or his right leg, the muscles there, the hamstring there, was not as strong as his left leg, and it was putting his extra strain on his left leg. Because of this asymmetry, it was causing a lot of hamstring strains. Now, perfect symmetry in your leg muscles, and I know we're getting into the weeds on this one, and I do apologize. Perfect symmetry in your leg muscles, 0% either way is nearly impossible. However, the difference between the symmetry in Watson's leg muscles was about 20%. He wants to get it down to about 6%. He's already got it down in that 10% area. A lot of again, this is OTAs, but a lot of the Packers reporters were raving about the burst and how spry and how fast that Watson looked down the field. So that is the positive portion with Watson. I still am a little bit gun shy on investing heavy on Watson. However, Brandon, because of his performance last year or lack thereof, he's pushed down in the early 9th round. If he continues this trajectory and everything is all warm and fuzzies coming out of Green Bay, I feel like he's going to get pushed up the draft board. And now is actually the time to draft Watson before he gets to the 8th round, before he gets to the 7th round. Is he a target or a fade for you, again, in the early 9th round?
Yeah, I mean, him spending thousands of dollars in his own pocket to try to get to a determination about why his hamstring, how to fix his hamstrings, is like me spending thousands of dollars trying to figure out why I can't win it big in sports betting. So, so eventually I'm going to figure it out. I mean, it's the same way with Christian Watson. I think we're looking at it in May, and yeah, he looks healthy now. That burst is there because he's absolutely healthy. He's not had to really put in too much work as we've got into early stages of OTAs, training camp. But from a price standpoint, I'll give you that. Price standpoint right now, ADP of wide receiver 44. You're getting him as a guy that's going to be on your bench, not have to worry about him starting right out of the gates. But once you come into the season, you're going to want to play him as a flex type of position player, because while he's on the field and healthy, he was the top targeted wide receiver for the Packers. He was the go-to guy for the Packers. So if he's healthy and he's on the field, I'll trust in him. But once he starts getting nicked up, banged up, then you want to kind of back off of the gas a little bit. He's the perfect type of player you want to draft and exploit in a trade when those numbers are there early in the season.
I think that the thing for me, if you draft him in the 9th round, you have to almost assume like he is going to miss some time.
Yes.
Like he is not playing 17 games this year. And that's okay for the 9th round. Like, that's okay, especially in a best ball format. Okay. Well, I'll live with him when he lives and I'll die with him when he dies. Like, that's okay, because you won't be dying much if you just soak a 9th round pick into Christian Watson. Okay. Moving on. Last thing I want to bring up. I know we're up against it. Antonio Gibson, 13th round right now. This is a player to borrow the old Brokeback Mountain line. I just can't quit you.
I'm not going to quit him.
You can't quit Antonio Gibson, a player that 3 years ago was being talked about as the next McCaffrey by some pundits, not by me. And I'm proud to say that, not by me. There are still some receipts out there of people who said he was the next McCaffrey. Why can you not get away from Gibson? I'm sure his 13th round price tag has something to do with that.
It will this year for sure. But Gibson's a guy, University of Memphis project. He's right down the road from me. I watched him play in school. So I've been on the Antonio. I called myself the conductor of the Antonio Gibson hype train coming out of college, because I was very high on him and what he could do coming into the NFL. Now he goes to Washington and essentially ruins his career there because they just didn't know how to utilize him correctly. And of course he got banged up a little bit here and there too. Change of scenery. He's in New England now. Change of scenery for New England as well. No longer with Bill Belichick at head coach. So let's see how this offense looks now with a fresh start and how things go there. They've already talked about and raved about what they can do with a player of Antonio Gibson's skill set from a creativity standpoint, lining him up outside wide as a wide receiver, creating packages in the backfield to just utilize his skill set as a receiver as well, not to mention his running back capabilities. So for me, that price tag at 13th round, you're going to get at him as a guy that could be your like RB5 in certain situations. And for me, I'm for it. Draft him all day long at that price point, just for the sheer upside alone that he teases us with constantly.
How does Brandon's thoughts on Antonio Gibson affect how he's drafting Ramondre Stevenson in the same backfield? That is among the questions we're going to tackle in the next segment. We're going to put we're going to put Brandon OTC, not Matt, on the clock. I don't know why I said Matt. We're going to put Brandon on the clock next segment. We're going to talk about Ramondre Stevenson or David Montgomery. We're going to talk about Travis Kelce or Trey McBride. We're going to talk about Puka Nacua or Garrett Wilson. That's coming up next. He's Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller and the Woo Fantasy Podcast. Check him out on the X at Roto Superstar. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Last segment of the show, we're finishing strong. It's coming up next.
Is Dynasty. And the place to play is myffpc.com. Go to myffpc, use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more. Now is the time to get in there and get set up with a startup draft. Now is the time, now that the rookies and everyone are set, because you can go in and you can start the draft and, you draft your Justin Jeffersons and Jamar Chases. And now that we know where the rookies are and where they're landing, you get going on that. So you want to try and set a startup draft for this week coming up if you're not involved yet. So go get involved. Use the QR code here or use the promo code that's in the link in the description here and get yourself going on Dynasty so you can really enjoy these players and draft the players you believe in. If you like Michael Penix Jr., you got to play Dynasty because you got to wait for him, but the payoff is big. And same with like Pearsall and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all these guys. Get in and do that. And I'll tell you what, the orphan leagues over there that we've been talking about, those all got bought up. They're actually all sold. People from this show I know took over a bunch of them. So right now, startups is the way to go. That's the way to rock and roll. It is startup season. Startup season and rookie draft season. That's what's up. Get set up at myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit $35 or more and give you a leg up. No dealing with chasing around your friends and making them pay dues and having your buddy be like, oh, dude, I got to quit the league because I got a dog and I can't pay attention no more and I don't want to do trades. Forget all that. You can play online, MyFFPC, high stakes, low stakes, whatever you want to do with experts. And if somebody leaves the league, it goes in that orphan pool and somebody picks it up. The league has never been disbanded on FFPC.com. That's directly from Eric Balkman over there. Has told me that. So that's what's up. Get set up.
The final segment of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour for May 23rd, 2024 is underway. Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He is Brandon Murchison from RotoBaller.com, the Woo Fantasy Podcast, at Roto Superstar on the X. This is compelling stuff anytime we get to the Would You Rather portion of the show because I always pit two players that are going basically next to each other in FFPC drafts. And a lot of times the answer I get is, I don't know, like I could go either way on it. But sometimes you never know what kind of nerve we're going to hit on. And maybe you'll feel more strongly about one player than the other. And we'll lead it off with something that people are going to have to decide right away in the first round of their FFPC best ball drafts this year, Brandon. And that's Puka Nacua or Garrett Wilson. These guys are going, if you're at the 10 spot, on average, you'll have your pick between Nacua or Wilson. If you are dead set on taking one of these receivers at that point, who are you more likely to pick?
I currently have Garrett Wilson ranked ahead of Puka Nacua. As much as I was a big proponent of Nacua last year, obviously it was price point dependent. Last year you were getting him for free or picking him off waivers. And Garrett Wilson last year was in this same spot, very much hyped with Aaron Rodgers coming into tow in New York. Now we're kind of repeating that situation. So it's essentially you're kind of getting a post-hype sleeper or post-hype hype guy with Garrett Wilson this year. So for me, I think that's what I'm going to go with. I like the upside of Wilson and what that potential is there with Aaron Rodgers this year in 2024, whereas Puka now has to contend with healthy Cooper Kupp, although he was the more targeted player between the two of them when they were on the field. How much of that had to play in with Cooper Kupp and his banged-up injuries, that's something to kind of keep in mind. So for me, between those two, I'm going Garrett Wilson.
Garrett Wilson is your pick there. It's interesting as we move on to tight ends here. This is probably the lowest I've seen Travis Kelce go in recent memory, and it's the highest I've seen Trey McBride go in his career. And these guys are both going back-to-back in the middle of the second round. Laporta usually goes off the board at that 1-2 turn, and then in the middle of the second round, again, tight end premium scoring with the FFPC. Kelce and McBride are basically going back-to-back. Would you rather get the grizzled veteran who you talked up in the first segment of the show tonight, or would you rather go with the young buck that is going to get a full year of Kyler Murray throwing to him in Trey McBride?
Again, I mean, it comes down to upside. You know what you're getting with a Travis Kelce. We saw that kind of start to turn, coming trend, getting a little bit older, and the numbers coming down last year from an efficiency standpoint. Now you also have to factor in extra weapons coming into play. We talked about it at the top of the show: Xavier Worthy, Marquise Brown, Rashee Rice making, headway last year in his rookie season as well. We talked about. So I think there's a lot more target competition for a Travis Kelce. So it's going to hurt him from that production standpoint. So for me, Trey McBride, upside alone, I think he's going to be a guy that's going to push for that tight end one finish this year, especially from a points per game average. Has Marvin Harrison coming into Arizona, has just a solid top option on the outside that's going to take a lot of that defensive attention away. And we saw last year with this Arizona offense, they're going to want to throw the ball. And I really like the upside that Trey McBride can bring you from a consistency standpoint. I think that target upside and consistency of 10 targets a game every single week, week in and week out, it's hard to replace that, and it's hard to get that when it comes to tight end position in fantasy football.
Dave Nowitzki chiming in on YouTube. Kelce might have women problems.
Now,
I don't know if he meant woman problems, because if he's with Taylor Swift and he has women plural problems, yeah, you got a problem at that point. Because not only is that going to cause you stress because of your relationship, Taylor Swift is probably busy writing a song about you right now, and it's going to be a surprise album release. So yes. Tread lightly, Travis Kelce, in regards to that. Moving forward here, we touched on this a little bit in the first hour, I believe. When we were talking about Jalen Wright, we were talking about the Jaguars offense, but Devon Achane and Travis Etienne are both going back-to-back at the 302 on average in the FFPC best ball tournament, Brandon. Mm-hmm. And with these two, I think we kind of talked about why we like the other Dolphins running backs other than Achane as far as draft capital goes. We kind of talked a little bit about Etienne not getting the volume that he did last year, but maybe that's a good thing, because he got a lot more volume last year, but his efficiency went way down. So there's different ways to look at this. I think I'd rather have Etienne at this point, knowing that I could get a good chunk of the Dolphins backfield later on in the draft. But who would you rather draft here at this point? Achane or Travis Etienne? Again, this is like early third round.
I'm full agreement with you. I'm going to take the shot at ETN. I think the consistency is going to be there as far as a touch total week in and week out. He's the guy that they're going to count on in that backfield with Jacksonville, which I think the Jacksonville offense is going to take a bigger step forward this year. Another year with Doug Peterson. I think there's going to be a little bit more consistency from the production standpoint, which is only going to help the efficiency numbers for a Travis Etienne, even if the workload is reduced, as we've talked about. But with Achane, I think, everybody loves that big playability, what he can do when he's on the field, pop off at any moment, score a long touchdown. But those are really hard to kind of guess week in and week out what he's going to have. And for me, they're going to run the ball with Raheem Mostert. And we talked about Jalen Wright earlier. I think he's going to find ways to get on the field himself. And that's just taking total touches away and opportunities away, usage away from a guy like Devon Achane. And for me, a three-headed monster, I'm just doing the math here, it's a lot harder to kind of work around than it is technically a one-headed monster in one backfield with ETN.
Well, and the other thing too with ETN, it's like, and I know that the Jaguars keep talking up Tank Bigsby, but they talked him up last year and that didn't get him very far. Yes. So like, you look at, like, not only is there fewer guys to go around, and they still have, who's the other cat they got from Cleveland, who's the third string running back in Cleveland? Now he's
Dearness Johnson.
Dearness Johnson, thank you.
Yep.
He's still there, and it's like you could make a case that he's actually more of a threat to ETN than Tank Bigsby is. I'll believe it when I see it with Bigsby. Dave Nowitzki, brings this up in the YouTube chat. Should I draft a running back or wide receiver in the first round? I'm kind of fungible with this. I don't really, pin myself into a corner. If I have the first overall pick this year, I'm probably taking I play in the KFFSC, Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, where you have to start three receivers in that format. And I know some people will take Lamb, some people take Tyreek Hill. I know Justin Jefferson's tumbled a little bit. I'm probably still taking McCaffrey in that format. But I don't really, it depends upon where I am. I don't know what I'm going to take, right?
Right, and that's the thing. You don't know until you get in the draft room what your draft position is, how you're going to kind of develop your strategy at that point. So for me, it depends really largely on where I'm at in the draft. If I'm on the front end of the board, I'm probably going to target the wide receivers more than I will the running backs. But if I'm on the back end of the board, I know I'm going to be able to get a solid stud running back, solid stud wide receiver that I can kind of start and build that core of my roster from that point forward. And you kind of flip it either way.
I think could be interesting this year is somebody who is at normally the back end of the first round. I think a lot of people take receivers there over running backs. Now that's changed the last couple of years. But what if you started with Gibbs and Jonathan Taylor at like the 112 and 201, and then you fly, now you're trying to fill your receivers after that. I'm not saying I would recommend doing that in a lot of drafts, but I'd like to try it in one draft to see how it turns out.
It's zigging when others zag, and that's
the whole idea. That's the whole idea. You zig, and when people are zagging, you zig, and when people are zigging and zagging, you zog. And that is a quote from Stephen Root's Jimmy James from the great 90s NBC sitcom News Radio, which I absolutely love. Moving on. Deebo Samuel and Devontae Smith. These are players from two of the Goliaths of the NFC and both on Super Bowl contenders this year. We heard the rumors about Samuel or Ayuk potentially being moved. We know the Niners drafted Ricky Pearsall, whereas the Eagles spent their first 2 picks on cornerbacks. Devontae Smith is still tangling with A.J. Brown for targets. Their Dallas Goedert is back too, and they have this guy out of the backfield this year, Saquon Barkley, who's been known to catch a pass or two as well. Both of these players, if we look at the ADP and the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, Devontae Smith, 405, Deebo Samuel, 402. So very close to each other. Samuel's going a little bit higher. Is that the way that you would put them?
I think so. From the standpoint of, I like, both offenses are very high octane, very high scoring, productive offenses. But we've seen that consistency from a target standpoint from Devontae Smith when he's healthy, he's on the field. But that's something you have to bake into Deebo Samuel, is a possibility of missed time, those injuries kind of mounting up a little bit. And let's be honest, there's been talk the entire offseason that there's potential to be traded of Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. So there's a good chance that, we get down to really, the weeds of the training camp and see there might be a potential move made. So whether that be Brandon Ayuk out the door and then you have Deebo Samuel as the bona fide number one, who knows? But then also you have to factor in too, at the tail end of the first round of the NFL draft, the 49ers decided to go ahead and take Ricky Pearsall from Florida, bring in a rookie wide receiver to, another mouth to feed in this offense. So for me, there's a lot of mouths to feed that are more productive type of mouths to feed than there are with Philadelphia. And I've seen that with Devontae Smith in this framing over the last couple of years with A.J. Brown there. Saquon Barkley, sure, I think he's going to take some targets away too, but I like the consistency and the upside a little bit more with Devontae Smith over Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, I think that's interesting there too. Because, you're trying to win $300,000 in the Fantasy Pros Championship, trying to win $1 million. I do think there's more. I can tell myself a better story with the upside with Smith rather than Samuel too. Let's move on to the end of the 6th round. David Montgomery and Ramondre Stevenson are going there, 6'11" and 6'12". We just touched on Jahmyr Gibbs earlier. Actually, Jimmy Williams in the YouTube chat said he just drafted Gibbs and Barkley at the 112 and 201. So congratulations there. Let us know how that turns out. Bill Hollywood says Jahmyr Gibbs is a trap for fantasy. It won't win you a ticket to the dance. Okay, if that's the case, David Montgomery should be the play here. David Montgomery at the 6'11", Ramondre Stevenson. We just talked about his new teammate, Antonio Gibson. Brandon, where do you fall in on this? Montgomery versus Stevenson.
I literally have them looking at my rankings. This is a coin flip. They are side by side in my rankings right now, and this is going to be a very fluctuating situation as we go through the summer. Foot to the flame right now, I would probably lean more Ramondre Stevenson. That's who I have one spot higher than David Montgomery currently. And that's just because he's the bona fide number one running back for the New England Patriots. And we saw from a usage standpoint, when he's healthy, they're going to give him the ball. Yeah. They're going to run it with Ramondre Stevenson. So the usage factor is what's really going to put him over the top for me right now. And the fact that I know that he will catch some passes, not going to catch all of them with Antonio Gibson there now, but he's still going to catch some passes in this offense. David Montgomery, he's going to be an RB2 come the end of the season. It's just he's going to score double-digit touchdowns. There's just no other way around it because of the offense that he's in. That offense, the Lions are going to really kind of run that 50-50 backfield with these two, and it's going to be a headache at times. but with Montgomery, you're still going to get some kind of a safer floor, I would say, but you're just not going to have the upside that Stevenson can kind of present on certain game situations.
I think that's the interesting thing with Stevenson. I know he kind of underwhelmed last year, but I think he was playing hurt a good amount last year, and he was hurt a lot last year. And if that's the case, are we really going to penalize him 4 rounds or whatever it was just because of injuries? Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't, but there is a buying opportunity there with Stevenson. 7th round, moving on there. Let's go to receivers, Chris Godwin and Jaden Reed. Now, Jaden Reed, to be fair, is going in the early 7th. Chris Godwin is more of a mid-7th round pick. However, we talked a little bit about Watson before. The Packers really have no number 1 receiver on that team. They got Wicks, they got Reed, they got Dobbs, they got Watson, they got the 2 tight ends, they got Josh Jacobs catching passes as well. There's a lot of different places that Jordan Love can go with the ball there. Now, Tampa, unless you're a Jalen McMillan fan, I mean, it's maybe Rashad White, it's maybe Cade Otton, and it's Evans, and it's Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin or Jaden Reed. I don't view them as dissimilar players, but there are some differences in their game. Which one would you rather have?
Based on the information that I have right now, May 23rd, I'm going to go with Chris Godwin. That is primarily based on the fact that we just heard this week at OTAs that the team has planned to move him primarily into the slot this year. And that is a big change of direction for Chris Godwin and his fantasy potential. Because we saw just 2 years ago when he played mostly out of the slot, he was a more highly productive player, saw a lot more target and volume from the slot as opposed to being on the outside where he could not win in most situations on the outside. He's a better primary receiver over the middle of the field, soft spot and zones, kind of making catchable target for the quarterback. So I think that's where I would lean with Godwin because I'm looking at that as an upside based on what you mentioned with Jordan Love and this receiving group in Green Bay. It's going to be a hot potato situation in certain weeks. There's going to be times where Romeo Dobbs is going to be the more targeted player on certain weeks. There's going to be times where it's Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, a guy that's really been touted a lot here as a late round sleeper too. You have to factor him in as well. So now it's, Godwin's a guy that burned a lot of people last year, and now you're getting a buying opportunity to get him at a discounted price in an offense that I believe is going to be an offense that's going to throw the ball a lot this year because that defense is still not going to be very good. They're going to have to throw the ball and kind of maintain from a point situation.
I think the other thing to keep in mind is maybe Jaden Reed was punching above his weight last year too.
Also, too,
there could be a regression there, whereas I don't necessarily. If there's a regression for Chris Godwin, it'll be a regression to the mean, which means a progression in his stats last year. So I think I'm with you on Godwin over Reed. We have time for one more. Let's do this. Brock Purdy and Caleb Williams, Mr. Last pick of the draft versus Mr. First pick of the draft, and they're going basically neck and neck in FFPC best ball drafts right now. Brock Purdy and Caleb Williams. Purdy 906, Caleb Williams at the 908. Which one are you drafting first this year?
Give me Brock Purdy. Easily, all day long. I've mentioned it kind of ad nauseum with Caleb Williams over the offseason. Once it was determined that he was going to be the Bears quarterback, it goes without saying, although they did bring in Keenan Allen, they did draft Roma Dunze, they've brought in DeAndre Swift, they put talent all around him. It's still Chicago. It's still it's still a cold weather city that come November, December is the reason why there's never been a player on this team in team history to throw for more than 4,000 yards in a single season. And for him to go over Brock Purdy and outperform Brock Purdy, he would have to do just that. He would have to go 4,000 yards and push 30 touchdowns, and it's not something that I think he will do in his rookie season in Chicago, where I've seen Brock Purdy over the course of the last year look good and consistent with Kyle Shanahan and that offense.
I'm with you. I'd rather have Purdy. However, there will be some drafts I'm in this year where I will wait on quarterback and I will take Caleb Williams maybe as my number one. If I don't take him as my number one, maybe I take Jordan Love and then I take Caleb Williams, or Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. That there's something said for that. Or probably, maybe most likely, Jared Goff and Caleb Williams, where I have that safety with Goff and I have that upside with Williams too. Now, that may not play out the way I want it to if these guys keep climbing ADP, but right now you probably could do it if you wanted to set your mind to it. That is going to complete our show tonight. remember to check out everything Brandon Murchison is creating over at rotoballer.com, the Woo Fantasy Podcast, anywhere you get fantasy, anywhere you get podcasts, and of course at Roto Superstar. Am I forgetting anything?
No, you touched them all, man. You hit the home run there.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate that we're started off with a baseball reference and we're ending with a baseball reference. Fantastic stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 2024 Fantasy Pros Championship is live. We got the 10 o'clock draft is full. That goes off in an hour. We got a midnight draft. If you want to jump in that and draft for $1 million, you can do so tonight, as well as all weekend long. $6 million prize pool in the Fantasy Pros Championship as well. Go to myffpc.com. We talked ad nauseum tonight about the FFPC Best Ball Tournament, a $300,000 grand prize, just $125 to enter. Or if you want to play in the Superflex Best Ball Tournament, $35 to enter a $100,000 grand prize this year. It was normally $50,000 last year. It's $100,000 this year. And then, of course, the FFPC Main Event Early Bird. Hammer that now. You have 8 days. And if you get in that early or get in on that early bird, save $100 on your first FFPC main event team, you'll be entered in that Pros versus Joe's drawing, and you can compete against all the industry pros for a 2025 FFPC main event team. We'll be giving away 7 of those. So sign up now at myffpc.com. Empire Leagues and Dynasty Leagues there as well. Check them out, myffpc.com. He is at Roto Superstar on the X. For Brandon Murchison, I am Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the Better Sports Network. Coming up next Thursday, I got a special treat for you. Follow me on X for a special Thursday broadcast. We'll tell you all about it there. Be good, everybody. Happy Memorial Day. Thank you to those who served. We'll talk with you again next week.